224/768.
Okay, I'm a SysAdmin, 15 years experience, old school Unix, Linux background. DevOps hit me, what, a year ago or so, loving the whole infrastructure as code type thing, loving the developers and operations guys working together. I know there's a lot of people with unicorn, pony, rainbow type feelings about it all. I still think it's a good thing. So I'm going to be talking about blue-green deployment in the real world. First of all, I just want to see about the audience. Who's used AWS here? And in particular, Autoscaling. Okay. And Chef. And in particular, Chef Server.
Hang on. Next one.
Who's done blue-green deployment, or does blue-green deployment? Okay. How long have you been doing this for?
The main part of it for about 2.5 years.
Yeah.
But it's not massively sophisticated.
Been around a while.
But we have.
Yeah.
We do blue-green deployment.
Any other deployment systems people care to talk about as canary deployments? Anything of interest, or is it just standard? Trash it, put the new one up, hope it goes okay.
Does everyone know what canary deployments are?
Yeah.
No.
We're not talking about those
I've got a
tonight.
feeling we do blue-green, but we haven't given it a name yet.
Right. Well, it's role switching.
Yeah.
People are calling it blue-green these days. But yeah, it's been around for ages.
What's the difference between that and what people call red-black?
Red-black? I don't know, just nothing. Okay, cool. Colour blindness.
Good.
If you don't understand a term I'm using or a concept I'm using or whatever, or you've misheard me, please do interrupt. But if you've got any questions or suggestions, or you've done it better, which you probably have, some of you, please wait until the Q&A at the end. That would be great. Right, next one. So, what is blue-green deployment? These are the best diagrams I pinched off the web to kind of describe what's going on. I'm going to be talking about stacks, so in a way, this is the wrong way around, but it fits nicely on the screen. So you start off with your live stack here. All the users are going to your live stack. You're developing whatever, staging, testing, building your next release on this not live stack. When it's ready to go live, you make a switch at the router, at DNS, somewhere, somehow. All of a sudden your users are on here. They're not on here. This gets recycled for the next phase of development, whatever. I guess going back to canary deployments, it wouldn't just be a complete on-off thing. You would slowly drip feed the new deployment out to small bunches of users, see how that gets on, and then if it's working, carry on. If it's not, roll back. So blue-green is more of a all or nothing, and canary is, I think Facebook do a lot of canary deployments. But anyway, so have I covered everything there? Yeah. So that's the blue-green bit. Why real world? I Googled for an image of chaos here, and I'm actually giving an example of some work I did for a client, and I'm not here to say that their organisation is chaos, but the real world. Often you're Googling, you've got a problem, you're looking for a solution, you're Googling for something. It's, oh yeah, blue-green deployment. Okay, this is how it works, and it's a very clean, nice-looking thing. So, oh yeah, that's going to work. I guess everyone here knows that you've got to tailor things for environment, and that's taken for the core, taken as read. But that process of taking it from the nice, clean, theoretical solution to the real world is actually a lot of blood, sweat and tears, a lot of compromise. So I'm going to talk about my journey of compromise and blood, sweat and tears to create a VPC in AWS that does blue-green deployment. So that's basically what the talk's about. So the brief I had for this job, new VPC for a website, had to be an EU Central 1. I don't know, I guess everyone's familiar. It's quite a new...
Is that Frankfurt?
Yes, it is, Frankfurt. This was about a year ago, so it was a year newer. Make the website more robust, maintain it preferably quicker, everyone wants that. Use Chef, they were already using Chef. Bringing in a whole new technology probably wouldn't have been a good idea, although I wanted to. Apply DevOps principles, particularly infrastructure as code, make it open to proper testing practices. What's the word?
Test-driven infrastructure.
Test-driven infrastructure, yes. Okay, so the options I looked at, Terraform looked amazing, and it probably would do it now. I haven't checked, but it probably would do it. But at the time, Frankfurt was only using version 4 signing. Terraform wasn't working with that. Ansible would have been my favourite. They have a VPC module, and it's probably production ready now, but back then it wasn't. CloudFormation, nasty JSON templates. I don't know, maybe there's some people here that love JSON. I think it's awful. Difficult to maintain, difficult to read, difficult to understand. Chef provisioning, again, that wasn't production ready. Bare Metal Chef, I think it's called. I think their release candidate came out in May. Is it May this year?
It is production ready now, but yeah. It wasn't
back in January, no. So, I mean, I was looking for a tool that would do everything, that would work, create the network, create the security groups, create the network ACLs, and the servers, and what was on the servers. And I guess the nearest fit at the time would have been Ansible and CloudFormation templates together. But I didn't really want to introduce a new technology, like I said earlier. So what I ended up with, Bash scripts and Chef. So this sounds like a bit archaic, relying on Bash scripts, but I think as far as this client was concerned, it was something they understood. It was very simple to see what was going on. Chef they had experience with, they had expertise in-house. So that's what I went with. So that's the initial infrastructure. Looks a little bit bleached out there. Classic 3-tier architecture coming down this way. Public, private, and this is persistence, so database, basically.
Would you like to remind us what the little diagrams mean?
What the what?
What the little pictures are?
Oh yeah. I will go through it because it's not all that clear, is it? So those are 3 tiers, 3 stacks we've got here. We've got production, non-production. Call that what you will. Is it staging? Is it dev? Is it whatever? Management. This is where the Chef server resides. This is where the NAT instances, that Autoscaling group up here. There's a Bastion host here. I don't know if anyone's worked with VPCs. I'm sure they have, but good practice just to have one spot where you can hop in. That's what the Bastion does. The NAT stuff is the one spot where everything gets out. So up here in the first tier, we've got the load balancers here. This is just a server. This shown here is an auto-scaling group. We've got Varnish, Drupal master, Drupal slave, Elasticache in place of Memcache. So both these groups can share the same Memcache store. Down here, MySQL database. Up here, external stuff, CloudFront and S3. So that was phase 1. This was before we'd even thought about blue-green. This was create me a VPC where I can stick my website. So The problem with this, I guess, in deployment terms, is here's your live, here's your not live stuff. Unless you want to go through and rename everything, what you have to do is once this one's ready, grab a copy of it, stick it on here, and what do you do in the meantime? You've got downtime. Maybe you've got to break the user sessions. You've got people connected to the database. Classic problem that blue-green deployment is supposed to solve. So the next bit was blue-green. Still keeping the stacks very much separate with the sort of thinking from the old design. And this time the switch was done in DNS. So it's the same architecture. We've just renamed this blue, renamed this green. And the idea is you're not stuck with this prod, non-prod thing. Oh, hang on a minute, live's actually on non-prod now. You've got blue-green. Problem with making the switch in DNS, it's quite a scary process. You might be involving other members of the operations team that have access to this stuff. You might be editing the zone file for your main company website. Even if you get it all right, it takes time to propagate across the globe. There's certain areas do an enormous amount of caching. So you're not going to get a nice, smooth transition, and rollback, again, is not going to be nice and smooth. If you decide it's all wrong, you roll it back. Okay, sounds easy, change the DNS back, but then it's got to propagate all the way back out again. Also, load balancers. If you've got a particularly high traffic site, load balancers can take a little bit of time to warm up. So if you suddenly switch over from your live site to your not live site, this load balancer is all nicely warmed up, serving traffic nicely. This one's cold. That's just going to cause problems with people visiting your site. You can get Amazon to warm it up for you. I think you've got to call them and ask, and they will let you know when it's ready. And it doesn't really fit in with maybe your production cycle or your time zone. Pain in the arse anyway. So, the final one we went with, we've moved the load balancers over here. Not particularly because they need to be in a management stack, but because that's a sort of a neutral stack that isn't blue, it isn't green. You have one load balancer is always the live one load balancer is always the not live one. And all you do is you switch this Varnish Autoscale group here. You say, at the moment, this one's in the live ELB, this one's in the staging ELB. You just switch it at the load balancer. You just say, okay, now this one's in the live one, this one's in the staging one, and you've done your switch, and it takes less than a second. It's very smooth. You can switch it back nice and easily. And you could probably mess around with canary type stuff if you had several different stacks you wanted to play around with. So one thing I ought to mention is when I was originally doing the architecture for this, I wanted Varnish up here, and I wanted ELBs between Varnish and Drupal. A bit tricky to do if anyone's, I don't know if anyone's actually interested in this at all, but it's a bit tricky to do. The best solution I saw involved putting Nginx on as well, because Varnish doesn't like talking to a load balancer. And I just didn't want to put an extra layer of something in there. So I'm using the directors within Varnish to talk to the Drupal backends. So that's why it looks like that. Anyone interested in networking? That's the network schema I came up with. It's 18 subnets because there's 2 availability zones. The reason why I didn't just go with /24, that's a huge amount of IPs for just a website. I don't know if this client's going to want to scale, but I thought there's no harm giving them the ability to. So this gives 30 instances in each subnet. You could have 21 more stacks, if I've done my maths right, which I may not have done. You could have 7 more tiers, 6 more subnets. Anyone familiar with security groups and ACLs in AWS? It can get a bit of a headache remembering what's stopping you doing something. What I decided to do is network ACLs kept everything within the stacks, but they weren't concerned about IP addresses. Okay, they were concerned about this IP address, but that was it. And then I used security groups to do the stuff based on ports, but it knew nothing about IP addresses. And I just find that's easier to maintain, it's easier for a client to understand, and you're less likely to make mistakes. It's probably less secure than absolutely nailing everything down to the last little thing, but this is a workable solution that I think, in terms of it being easy to maintain, in the real world ends up being actually more secure because it gets maintained properly. So, I was saying I use bash scripts. I wrote some bash scripts with the help of Google and lots of other people. 2 main scripts create the stack. So I've got one script that creates an autoscale group for Varnish, one script that creates an autoscale group for Drupal. I created the VPC infrastructure manually using the console for reasons I mentioned earlier, not having a suitable technology that would work in this situation. So to get something up and running quickly and to be able to show something, I created it by hand. So in a minute you'll see the network, the VPC, the security groups, network ACLs, everything, subnets, that's all in place. NAT autoscale groups are also already in place. I've got a script that does that. There's a problem with NAT in that if you want your instances to talk to the outside world, even just to get updates or whatever, in a VPC it has to go through a NAT instance. It's a potential single point of failure. There's lots of different ways of getting around that. This script uses user data. It puts an init script on the NAT instances that runs when they start. It sorts out all the properties that a NAT machine has to have, and it also grabs all the routing from AWS. So you'll see later on, there's an autoscale group, there's 1 in each availability zone. Autoscale group says always have 2. 1 goes down, it makes another one. It shouldn't be too much of a hiccup. So these scripts, they use the AWS command line interface commands. They create an RDS instance, they create load balancers, the Elasticache clusters. I've still got it creating those, but the Drupal instance I've got on the demo doesn't actually use them because it means installing modules and all that kind of thing. Creates the launch configurations, the autoscaling groups. In order to pass information through from the create scripts into Chef, making use of tags, and then make use of the AWS commands to query the tags to get information out to say, you're a so-and-so, use this recipe, and user data as well. There's a lot of stuff put into user data. I can dig into that later if anyone's interested. So also making use of S3 for various keys that are needed, the website content, the database content, all in S3. I'm using IAM roles. I don't know if people are using IAM roles. If you're not, you should. It means instances have permissions to do stuff that you need them to do. You can't assign them a role after you've created them. So even if there's nothing in your role, when you're making a new instance, give it a role, and then you can fill in the policies later on. Otherwise, you've just got to remake the whole thing, which isn't much fun. So I'm going to kick off, hopefully, if it lets me. So, just to show there's no smoke and mirrors going on, here's the AWS console. I've got my HA NAT instances there, high availability, the Chef server made by hand, the Bastion's made by hand. So again, real world, this isn't a perfect, beautiful thing that you just type go and it makes everything. It could iterate towards that if that was needed. So I'm going to be creating some auto-scaling groups. There's the NAT one. I'm going to be creating some more for Varnish and Drupal and some launch configurations. So nothing in there at the moment. I'll come back to my little script. Right. So I'll start off with the Drupal layer because that takes longer to make. The script takes some arguments. I'm going to create the blue in the blue stack. And I'm going to make it live. I'll explain the live staging options later. I'll kick that off. It's after some passwords. Right. So I am cheating a bit. I've already created the RDS instances because that takes a while to fire up. I've already created the Elasticache clusters because that takes a while to fire up. There you go. It would normally sit there for 5 minutes waiting for the RDS endpoint to be reported. It's created a couple of alarms and notifications and things as well to let you know if the scaling event happens. So, if we switch back to the console and refresh that, we've now got 2 auto-scaling groups, Drupal master, Drupal slave, and we need to refresh that one as well. Launch configurations, and we should see instances being made by the auto-scaling groups now. I'll just wait for the beach ball. Okay, I'm going to kick off. I'm going to kick off the other stack whilst we're waiting. So I'm going to kick off green staging. Okay, let's go back to that. Right, so there's the 2 blue launch configurations. Before this all kicks off as well, I've taken those. The other thing I didn't create was the load balancers, because I wanted to take the load balancer name, that's the C name that's given to you by Amazon, and I want to hook it up to something like this and like that. So at the moment this will be our blue stack, this will be our green stack staging. There's nothing there at the moment. Right, is this playing ball with us? Right, blue Drupal master, blue Drupal slave, the green stuff's coming online as well. That would be the green slave. If we have a look at that. That should be chugging through.
Yes. Bloody hell. Fancy.
Charlie's a professional.
Yeah. Proper job.
That's chugging through my chef recipe, doing various bits and pieces.
Is that HPUX command?
Look at the slave. I used an old AMI for this because I think the next one caused a few problems. I didn't have time to look into what they were. So that's the blue slave chugging away. Did I do the Varnish ones? No, just the Drupal ones. Okay. This one's a lot quicker. So let's create, well, would have created an ELB if it wasn't there already. And some alerting stuff. I'll do the green one as well. Okay. So, I don't know if anyone's interested in looking at the user data stuff. It's kind of where a lot of the magic happens.
Yeah,
Cloud
yeah,
in it.
absolutely.
It does look a bit clunky, but it works. So this makes the user data. It grabs a load of stuff from this user script thing and munges it in. Makes a few changes. There's the password going in. Passwords. There's the stuff about hooking into Chef. The real interesting stuff is actually in that text file. Here. So install Chef, grabs a few things from S3 so that it can hook into the Chef server. Uses a bit of jiggery pokery to get some instance names. Records what the RDS database is in a nice little file that you can grab later. Various bits and pieces like that. One thing I did, which is a small thing that I quite like, this cloud config file. Normally instances will update themselves based on certain criteria that Amazon have decided is generally acceptable if they need it. So they'll run the updates, but they won't necessarily reboot. So you've still got the processes running that aren't, possibly security holes, whatever. So I put this in here. It needs to be starting a nice little command that not everyone knows about. Tells you what stuff needs restart. If anything needs restarting, then it'll just reboot after it's done all the Chef stuff. And unfortunately, that might mean that this demo takes a little bit longer. Right, okay, so that's finished. And there you go, that's that message that we just saw. Again, on the blue slave. So, I don't know when that'll be ready. Not yet, obviously. Let's have a look at the Varnish instance. Blue Varnish. If anyone's wondering how I'm SSHing into these 10 dot addresses,
I was about to ask that.
it's
Got VPN set up with you.
it's just an SSH config file. Wrong one. Yeah, I need SSH in there. Got a lot of stuff in there.
Yeah.
So here we go. If it's one of those, here's the user you use. Here's the key you use. Proxy through the Bastion. But that's another story. Hopefully. I bet you it's rebooting as well. Varnish one's a lot quicker. Okay, so the Drupal master is up. You should have some stuff in the web root. Hopefully the database has been propagated. slave. So nothing, Chef didn't, the Chef recipe for the slave didn't pull any web content or anything. I've got lsync D running to make sure the slave looks the same as the master. So it's grabbing everything from the web root, it's grabbing all the Apache config, so the slave has exactly the same stuff that the master has. So that's working. We need to know that Varnish is up, and then we can look at the website. Oops. Yeah. I noticed a problem with lsync actually, that it wanted to restart Apache on every single file that changed, and it shouldn't be doing that. You can put delays in, and delays are there, but they don't appear to be working. So I noticed this just before I left. Yeah, it's doing lots of restarts. We'll just leave that for a bit, it does sort itself out. Okay, Varnish is running. Obviously nobody's hitting the site.
That's bad.
There we go. Okay, so it's just a very basic Drupal installation that I've put up. So whilst the green one's coming up, this is the Chef side of things. Like I say, I manually set up the Chef server. I'm sure there's a clever way of doing that. Andy demonstrated a very nice way of doing that a few months ago. Various bits and pieces I did manually. So the Varnish cookbook obviously installs and configures Varnish. This bit I'll come back to. Drupal cookbook, there's obviously different recipes for master and slave. The master needs to grab all the content down, all changes are made on the master and they get copied to the slave. So the slave recipe doesn't need to do a lot of stuff that the master one does. Everything downloaded from S3, and then it's run over. Various Chef attributes are modified depending on things that the user data wrote, and then it runs over the config files and it matches them to what you want them to be. It'll create a database user, it'll populate it from S3, and as I was saying earlier, lsync D is used. The lsync slave, the Drupal slave, needs to get the key for the master, because otherwise they can't communicate. So the master sticks that up in S3. There's a cron job on the slave. It checks to see what's up there. Does it match with what I've got? No. Grab it, change it, and then they can talk. I'll talk about this stuff in a sec. So why are we using the cron bash AWS CLI? Sounds very clumsy. Why do we need it? The reason is this. I'm sure you've all heard of this by now. Cattle, not pets. Your servers. So it's all very well to say, yeah, great, we can chuck these servers away, we make a new one, we can have 10, we can have 1, we can have 100. It doesn't matter. How do you get them talking to each other? In this setup, the Drupal master and slave, they need to have the same config and content. Drupal needs to know about the Varnish servers. Varnish needs to know about the Drupal servers. Any of them can be blown away and replaced. You can scale up, you can scale down. My solution for it was a cron-controlled bash script that used AWS CLI to query what was out there. It would look for tags, and it would figure out from the metadata that's available at AWS, what was out there, what the IP addresses were, who to switch config with, do I need a key for this or not? And I've got these cron jobs running every minute. It sounds like a massive overhead, but they do a quick check to see if anything's needed. If it's not, they don't do the work. So I don't know. It doesn't seem to impact performance from what I can see. That was my solution for how to do it. There's probably better things out there. I don't know. But it works. They all seem to be able to figure out who's where and talk to them. The other thing caused a bit of confusion was this whole business of roles, environments, stacks. Chef has some very specific ways of talking about what it means by role and environment. So these two fit with Chef. So the role of the server, what it actually does, and the environment is what stage in the deployment cycle it is. I've been calling blue and green a stack. Other people call it environment, but again, that clashes. Anyway, so going back to the create scripts, I don't know if you can remember, I had to put, was it live or was it staging? So blue, green, both stacks, the whole idea is they're supposed to be the same, although they aren't. Staging, you want to lock down access, you don't want the general public looking at your staging site. There might be all kinds of things on there. You definitely don't want Google to index it. There could be some awful things on there that get indexed more highly than your real content. Whatever, anyway. So staging has to be different, even though it's supposed to be the same. So the way I got around this is a bolt-on recipe. You've still got your Drupal server master recipe, but if the create script said staging, then it will also add to the run list a staging recipe. That seemed to be the simplest thing to do. And when you switch the stacks, you also have to knock that staging thing off the run list and add it to the other run list. I don't have that automated. I bet you it would take 5 minutes to write a script, a switch script, that would do all this stuff. But that's where we are at the moment. So, back to demo. I'm hoping the green one's working now. So you can see a slightly different URL here. They both look exactly the same though. So I'll just log in. Staging, so this is the green one. Going back to the create script I used, green was staging. So I'll add some new content. Okay, then log out. So that's staging is green. This is the live site. Log in. Some new content. Oops. Stack. So it's the stack. And log out. So blueandgreen.MySysAdmin.co.uk is the blue stack. Blue-green stage is the green stack. So this is where we do our blue-green switch. I'm going to do it on the console. It can equally be done on the command line. So it's done within the load balancers, or already in the load balancers. Is that? Can people read that okay? That's too big. Okay, so stack 1 load balancer has the blue Varnish instance in it. I'm going to edit the instances. I'm going to put in the green Varnish. I'm going to take out the blue Varnish. Save that. Currently out of service, it's figuring out if it's actually really there. And step 2, I'm going to do the opposite. Take out the green, put in the blue. Okay. That's back in service. So what you should see now is the live URL used to be the blue stack. Is now the green stack.
Round of applause. Successful demo. It always deserves a round of applause, I think.
Staging, I haven't checked to see if that's back in service, but it should be by now. Was the green stack, is now the blue stack. And it should be as easy as that. I said there's a few little tweaks around changing the run lists, that kind of thing. There's also, in the user data, there's Chef registration init file, init script that's put on the servers so that when they're destroyed, or when they're rebooted, they remove themselves from Chef, and when they restart, they re-register themselves with Chef. That references a first boot.json, which will have, if it's started up as a staging instance, will have the staging run list. So again, that would need to be edited, but that can all be quite easily scripted and run as a switch.sh or whatever. So, phew. What's next? There we go.